One of the most common suggestions to make a video about, and one of the most common questions on Q&As that I get,
One of the most common suggestions to make a video about and one of the most common questions and Q&As that I get
is what is the most horrific case I've ever heard of? It's a case that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of by now, but
is what is the most horrific case I've heard of. It's a case that I'm sure a lot of you've heard of by now, but
I'm not sure if you've ever heard about it in complete, gruesome detail.
I'm not sure if you ever heard about it in complete gruesome detail.
This is the story of Junko Furuta, widely considered to be one of the worst crimes ever committed in human history.
This is the story of Junko Furuta, widely considered to be one of the worst crimes ever committed in human history.
So for the love of God, please don't watch this if you're sensitive to extreme violence, especially of the sexual variety.
The love of God, please don't watch this if you're sensitive to extreme violence, especially of the sexual variety.
Trust me. Junko Furuta was a young woman who was born in Misato in the Saitama prefecture of Japan.
Trust me, Junko Furuta was a young woman who was born in Misato in the Saitama prefecture of Japan.
Her family consisted of a mother, father, an older brother, and a younger brother.
Her family consisted of a mother, father, an older brother, and a younger brother.
She attended high school at a school in Saitama while working part-time at a plastic molding factory after school.
She attended high school at a school in Saitama while working part-time at a plastic molding factory after school.
She was saving up for a big graduation trip she was planning. She was all set up to start working at an electronics store after she graduated.
She was saving up for a big graduation trip she was planning. She was all set up to start working at an electronics store after she graduated.
She was fairly popular and well liked by her classmates. She had great grades and was hardly ever absent. She was active, attractive, and attracted a lot of attention.
She was very popular and well liked by her classmates. She had great grades and was hardly even absent. She was active, attractive, and attracted a lot of attention,
which made some people jealous. She didn't drink, didn't smoke, and definitely never touched any drugs.
Which made some people jealous. She didn't drink, didn't smoke, and definitely never touched any drugs.
This made her seem very lame in the eyes of the thugs around the school, the Yakuza wannabes.
This made her seem very lame in the eyes of thugs around at the school, Yakuza wannabes.
One of the boys in this group was named Hiroshi Miyano. He actually developed a bit of a crush on her and wanted to get physical with her.
One of the boys in this group was named Hiroshi Miyano. He actually developed a bit of a crush on her and wanted to get physical with her.
He proposed this and she refused. Hiroshi was a pretty big bully in this school, one of the only ones actually involved with the...
He proposed this and she refused. Hiroshi was a pretty big bully in this school, one of the only ones actually involved with the
younger members of the Yakuza at the time. Usually,
the younger member of the Yakuza at the time, usually
nobody dared defy him. He couldn't believe that Junko actually had the gall to turn him down.
Nobody dared defy him. He could believe that Junko actually had that goal to turn him down.
Hiroshi did not take this well at all. He couldn't believe that anyone would ever reject him. He took it as a complete and total insult.
Hiroshi did not take this well at all, couldn't believe that anyone would ever reject him, thought it as complete and total insult.
He got together with a few of his wannabe Yakuza buddies and they all hatched a plan to get revenge on Junko.
He got together with a few of these wannabe Yakuza buddies and they all had hatched a plan to get revenge of Junko.
They would get another one of their friends to attack Junko, and then Hiroshi would come to the rescue.
They would get another one of their friends to attack Junko and Hiroshi would come to the rescue.
After he won a bit of her trust, they could take her wherever they wanted.
After he won a bit of her trust, they could take her wherever they wanted.
On November 25th of 1988, Junko was riding her bike home from her part-time job.
On November 25 of 1988, Junko was riding her bike home from her part-time job
When an unknown boy attacked her and knocked her off of her bike.
when an unknown boy attacked her and knocked her off of her bike.
The boy who liked her, Hiroshi Miyano, was conveniently across the street while the whole thing happened.
The boy who liked her, Hiroshi Miyano, was conveniently across the street while the
came to Junko's aid and scared off the random boy. He then offered to escort her home.
Junko's and scared of the random boys he attended offered to escort her home.
Everything seemed to be going as planned. While Junko didn't actually trust him, it seemed better than the alternative of possibly being
Everything seemed to be going as planned. While Junko didn't actually trust him, it seemed better than alternative as possibly
attacked again. She didn't have any idea that Hiroshi harbored any sort of hatred towards her. She wouldn't have imagined that
being attacked again. She didn't have any idea that Hiroshi has harbored any sort of hatred towards her. She wouldn't have imagined that he would be
planning anything like this. Hiroshi took Junko into an abandoned warehouse and revealed his Yakuza connections to her.
Planning anything like this, Hiroshi took Junko in an abandoned warehouse and revealing his Yakuza connections to her.
He then took his time raping her over and over. Then he took her to a hotel.
He then took this time raping her over and over. Then he took her to a hotel.
In the hotel, he called his friends, Joe Ogura and Yasushi Watanabe. From then on, he and his three friends took turns assaulting her.
In the hotel, he called his friend Joe Ogura and Yasushi Watanabe from one of the three friends.
Unfortunately, this was not their first time doing this, as they had just recently done it to another girl in the past few weeks.
Unfortunately, this was not their first time doing this, as they had just recently done it another girl in the past few weeks.
They decided that they were having far too much fun to just set her free again.
They decided that they were having far too much fun to just set her free again.
There was also the possibility that she would call the cops and tell them what happened, and they couldn't have that.
There was also the possibility that she would call the cops and tell them what happened, and they couldn't have that.
The next morning, Hiroshi took Junko to a nearby park, where Joe, Yasushi, and a fourth boy, Nobuharu Minato, were.
The next morning, Hiroshi took Junko to a nearby park where Joe, Yasushi, and fourth boy Nobuharu Minato
waiting. They learned Junko's address and used it to threaten her, telling her that they would kill her entire family if she tried to get away.
Waiting, they learned Junko's address and used it to threaten her, telling her that they would kill her entire family if she tried to get away.
The four teenage boys then took her back to Minato's parents' home where they continued to assault her. This is where, for
The four teenage boys then took her back to Minato's parents' home where they continued to assault her. This is where
42 more days she would be held prisoner.
42 more days she would be held prisoner.
On the third day that Junko was missing, her parents were dealing with the police, trying to get her found.
On the third day that Junko was missing, her parents were dealing with the police trying to get her around.
Knowing this would happen, the captors made her call her parents and tell them that she had run away and was staying with a friend, safe and sound.
Knowing this would happen, the captors made her call her parents and tell them that she had run away and was staying with a friend safe and around.
She was forced to ask her mom to stop the investigation.
She was forced to ask her mom to stop the investigation.
They held Junko captive in the bedroom, forcing her to pose as one of the boys' girlfriend. It didn't take long for the parents to realize
They held Junko captive in the bedroom, forcing her to pose as one of the boys' girlfriend. I didn't long for the parents
that this was a lie. Eventually, they dropped the whole girlfriend act altogether, as it was very clear that they weren't going to get in any trouble.
Eventually, they dropped the whole girlfriend a trap. It was very clear to weren't going to get into any trouble.
Immediately after arriving at the home, the boys forced Junko into becoming their toy.
Immediately after arriving at the home, the boys forced Junko into becoming their toy. They
beat her relentlessly and raped her countless times a day, often taking turns.
Beat her relentlessly and raped her countless times a day, often taking turns.
They were proud of what they were doing, regularly boasting to their friends that they had a woman trapped and ready for their personal use.
They were proud of what they were doing, regularly posting to their friends that they had a woman trapped already for their personal use.
A load of their friends to come over and have their way with her. In the first few days, at least 30 of them raped her, and at least 100 knew of her imprisonment. Even
on the third friends to come over and have their way her in the first few days, at 30 of them raped her, at least 100 knew.
Women were invited to come see the spectacle, with a young girl even being invited to come over and see the prisoner.
Invited to come to see a spectacle with a young girl even being invited to come over and see the prisoner.
Who then took a pen and doodled on her face. By the day 7 mark, Junko had been already completely stripped of all of her humanity.
Who then took a pen and doodled of their face. By the 7th mark, Junko had been already completely stripped for all of her humanity.
She was forced to be naked at all times and was constantly beaten and humiliated. They would shove her into the freezer for hours.
She was forced to be naked all time and was constantly beaten and humiliated. They would shove her into the freezer for hours.
When they were bored with her, only pulling her out when they wanted to assault her again. Nobuharu Minato's brother and parents were living in
bored with her, only pulling her out when they wanted to assault her again. Nobuharu Minato's brothers and parents were living in
the same house that she was being held in. His brother did nothing aside from informing him
the same house that she was being held in. His brother did nothing aside from informing him
that Junko might die at this rate. His parents were afraid to intervene as they had seen Nobuharu's violent nature firsthand.
That Junko might die at this rate. His parents were afraid to intervene as they had seen Nobuharu's violent nature firsthand.
They also knew of his association with the Yakuza and feared of their possible retaliation. And
They also knew of his association with Yakuza or read of their possible relation.
most disgustingly, they worried about losing their good reputation in the community.
And the most disgustingly, they worried about losing their good reputation in the community.
After about 10 days of this torture, Junko's body was already starting to fail her. Because of the ongoing, endless beatings, so much blood had accumulated in her.
After about 10 days of this torture, Junko's body was already starting to fail her because of the going endless wherein so much blood had accumulated.
Her sinuses that she could no longer breathe through her nose. Her digestive system was also beginning to refuse food and water.
In her sinuses, that she could not longer breathe it through her nose. Her digestive system was also beginning to refuse food and water.
If she attempted to eat or drink anything, she would instantly vomit. This also led to severe dehydration. Anytime she would vomit,
If she attempted to eat or drink anything, she would instantly vomit. This also led to severe dehydration anytime.
her attackers would get angry and beat her even further. A vicious
She would vomit, her attackers would get angry and beat her even further vicious.
cycle that had no end in sight. When the nights got even colder, she was forced to sleep on the balcony of the home in extreme cold temperatures.
Cycle that had no him inside. When the nights got even colder, she was forced to sleep on balcony of the home in extremely cold temperatures.
Sometimes near or below freezing. Eventually, one of the men that the attackers would invite over to the house to see
Sometimes near or below freezing, eventually one of the men that the attacks would invite over to the house.
Junko would go on to tell someone else about her, his brother. This brother of his ended up informing the police.
To see Junko would go on to tell someone else about her, his brother. This brother of his ended up informing the police
about what was going on at the Minato house. 2 officers were soon dispatched to go check things out.
About what was going on at the Minato house, 2 officers were soon dispatched to go check this out.
Minato's parents came to the door. When the police explained the situation, the parents simply responded that there was no girl in the house.
Minato's parents came to the door. When the police explained the situation, the parents simply responded that there was no girl in the house.
The police took it at face value, thanked them, and left, without ever bothering to check even a single detail.
The police took it at face value, thanked them, and left without ever bothering to check even a single detail.
After 20 days of torture, Junko was rendered completely unable to walk. She had had lighter fluid poured on her legs and set on fire, leaving her with severe burns.
Junko was rendered completely unable to walk. She had lighter fluid poured on her legs and to set on fire, leaving her with
burns. Her legs had also been targeted so severely during the beatings that they were left with severe muscle damage.
Her legs had also been targeted so severely during the beatings that they were left with severe muscle damage.
Unable to grip anything with her hands anymore, as they had been smashed with dumbbells to the point where her bones were crushed.
Was unable to grip anything with her hands anymore, as they had been smashed with doubles to point where her
crushed and her fingernails were shattered. Some nights later, the attackers got more rowdy than
crushing and her fingernails were shattered. Some nights later, the attackers got more rowdy
than usual and ended up drinking too much. Junko took this as a chance to try to escape. She crawled down the
than usually and ended up drinking too much. Junko took this as a chance to try to escape.
stairs from the bedroom and reached the phone downstairs.
She crawled down the stairs from the bedroom and reached the phone downstairs.
She picked up the phone and began to call the police. The phone rang and an officer picked up. Just as she was about to speak, Hiroshi
She picked up the phone and began to call the police. The phone rang and an officer picked up just as she was about to speak. Hiroshi
came up behind her and grabbed the phone from her hands. He put the receiver to his ear and said, "I dialed by mistake." Hanging up
came up behind her and grabbed the phone from her hands. He put the receiver to his ear and said, "I dialed by mistake." Hanging up the phone, she was then pulled.
the phone. She was then pulled back into the bedroom. She was in complete terror as she would obviously be severely punished for this. And she was correct. They
Back in the bedroom, she was in complete terror, as she would obviously be severely punished for his, and she was correct.
punished her by holding her down and taunting her by waving a candle's flame all around her. Then they covered her entire body, mainly
Punished her, holding her down, towering her by waving a candle's flame around her. Then they
her legs in lighter fluid and set her on fire once more. Afterwards, she started convulsing. The boys told everyone that she was fake.
fluid and set her on fire once more. Afterwards, she started convulsing. The boys told everyone that
and set her on fire once again, only to put it out shortly after. Somehow, she survived.
set her on fire once again, only to put it out shortly after. Somehow, she survived.
From this point on, she began begging her captors to just kill her and be done with it. They wouldn't grant her that favor.
From this point off, she began beginning her captors to just kill her and be done with it. They wouldn't grant her that favor.
After being set on fire, they discovered a new way to torture her. The boys would hold her head against the concrete while the
After being set on fire, discovered a new way to torture her. The boys would hold her head against the concrete wall.
others would jump on it. One can only imagine what kind of pain and damage this would have caused.
The others would jump on. Can only imagine what kind of pain and damage this would have caused.
After about 30 days, Junko was no longer able to urinate properly. She had suffered severe damage to her genitals
After about 30 days, Junko was no longer able to urinate properly. She had suffered severe damage to her genitals after they
they had been burned with cigarette lighters. She also had various
had been burned with cigarette lighters. She
foreign objects inserted into her, many sharp and jagged. Even
objects inserted into her, many sharp and jagged.
fireworks had been inserted into her. The fireworks were not limited to only one orifice, as they were also inserted into her anus, mouth,
And even fireworks had been inserted into her. The fireworks were not limited to only one orifice, as they were also inserted into her anus
and ears as well. She was left with eardrum damage so severe that she was nearly deaf at this point.
and ears as well. She was left with eardrum damage so severe that she was nearly deaf at this.
Her hands and feet were so damaged that she could hardly move. At best, she could crawl. It took her over an hour to crawl to the bathroom.
Her hands and feet were so damaged that she could hardly move off the bed. She could crawl. It took her over an hour to crawl to the bathroom.
A later report showed that her brain size was greatly reduced by this point in time.
A later report showed that her brain size was greatly reduced by his point in time.
Due to her hellish appearance, the boys no longer found her attractive.
Due to her hellish appearance, the boys no longer found her attractive.
They used the same strategy again to abduct and gang rape another 19-year-old woman while she was on her way home from work.
They used the same strategy again to abduct and gang rape another 19-year-old woman while she was on her way home from work.
During these 44 days of hell, Junko Furuta was forced to withstand the most unspeakable torture and suffering that a person can imagine.
During these 44 days of hell, Junko Furuta was forced to withstand the most unspeakable torture and suffering that a person can imagine. Some of what was done.
Some of what was done to her includes being raped many times every single day, day and night, in all orifices. More than 100 men are believed to have raped her.
To her includes being raped many times every single day, day and night, in all orifices. More than 100 men are believed to have.
By the end, sometimes she was raped by up to 12 different attackers in a single day.
By the end, sometimes she was raped by up to 12 different attackers in a single day.
Constant humiliation. She was forced to be left naked most of the time. Many of the men who raped her also urinated on her.
Constant humiliation. She was forced to be left naked most of the time. Many of the men who raped her also urinated on her.
She was forced to pleasure herself in front of the attackers for their entertainment.
She was forced to pleasure herself in front of the attackers for their entertainment.
She was beaten physically every day. She was beaten with golf clubs, iron rods, bamboo.
She was beaten physically every day. She was beaten with golf clubs, iron rods,
sticks, and various other objects. She had dumbbells dropped all over her body and her head stomped against the ground, face first.
Sticks and various other objects. She had dumbbells dropped all over her body and her stomped against the ground, face first.
She had hot wax poured all over her face with a focus on her eyelids. Her eyelids were also burned with cigarettes and cigarette lighters.
She had hot wax poured all over her face, with a focus on her eyelids were also burned with cigarettes and cigarette lighters.
She was violated with a long list of various objects shoved into all orifices, including but not limited to bottles, both broken and unbroken, iron bars.
She was violated with a long list of various objects shoved in all orifices, including but not limited to bottles, but broken and unbroken iron bars,
scissors, roasting needles, chicken skewers, and more. She was given only the strict bare minimum of food and water.
Scissors, roasting needles, chicken skewers, and more. She was given only the strict bare minimum of food and water.
At times, she was forced to eat cockroaches and drink urine. She had fireworks put into all of her orifices.
All times she was forced to eat cockroaches and drink urinate. She had fireworks put into all of her orifices,
leaving damage and severe burns. She had her left nipple ripped off by a pair of pliers.
Leaving damage and severe burns. She had her left nipple ripped off by a pair of pliers.
She would be tied up flat on the floor and had dumbbells dropped all over her body. The drops on her abdomen were so hard that it caused her to lose all.
She would be tied flat on the floor and the dumbbells dropped all over her body. The drops on her abdomen were so hard that it caused her to lose all
control of her bowels. needles. She was hung from the ceiling and used as a punching bag. She was shoved into a freezer and kept there for hours at a time.
Controlled her bowels. She was hung from the ceiling and used as a punching bag. She was shoved into a freezer and kept there for hours at a time. Her eyelids
Her eyelids were burned with hot wax and lighters when she closed her eyes in fear.
were burned with hot wax and lighters when she closed her eyes in fear.
Her breasts were stabbed with sewing needles, the needles often being left inside.
Her breasts were stabbed with sewing needles, the needles often being left inside.
Her genitals were burned with cigarettes and lighters. She had a hot, lit light bulb inserted into her vagina and moved around until it shattered.
Her genitals were burned with cigarettes and lighters. She had a hot lit light bulb inserted into her vagina and moved around until it shattered.
By the end, she looked like a completely different person after all of the damage. It was hard
By the end, she looked like a completely different person after of a damage. It was.
to even make out her facial features. Her body was severely damaged and crippled, and she smelled as if she were already rotting.
Even make out her facial features. Her body was severely damaged and crippled, and she smelled as if she were already rotting.
She was continuously heavily bleeding from her genitals from all of the abuse. She wheezed heavily, struggling to breathe from all of the blood accumulated.
She was continuously heavily bleeding from her genitals from all of the abuse. She wheezed heavily, strongly to breathe from all of the blood accumulated.
In her sinuses. On day 40, January 1st, Junko woke up to New Year's Day alone. She spent the day begging to be killed.
Sinus on day 40, January 1st, Junko woke up the New Year's Day alone. She spent 2 days beginning to
completely unable to move. 3 days later, on the fateful day of the 4th of January, the boys challenged Junko
kill it, completely unable to move. 3 days later, of the fateful day of the 4th of January, the boys challenged
to a game of Mahjong Solitaire and forced her to play. Somehow, even in her condition, she won the game.
Game of Mahjong Solitaire forced her to play. Somehow, even in her condition, she won the game.
This infuriated her captors, who treated her to a severe beating with an iron barbell.
They infuriated her captors, who treated her to severe beating with an iron barbell.
And then poured lighter fluid all over her arms, her legs, her stomach, and finally her face, dumping lighter fluid even into her eyes.
And then poured lighter fluid all over her arms, her legs, her stomach, and finally her dumping lighter fluid even into her eyes.
Then they put a candle to her face, igniting it all. She weakly attempted to put out the flames, but didn't have the strength to do so.
Then they put a candle to her face, igniting it all. She weakly attempted to put out the flames, but didn't have the strength to do so.
This final torture lasted for a grueling 2 hours altogether. Already having been in a horrible condition,
This final torture lasts for a grueling 2 hours. Stoger already having been in a horrible condition.
Junko went into shock and finally died the following day.
Junko went in shock and finally died the following day.
Minato's brother called him within 24 hours to inform him that Junko had died. The boys
Minato's brothers called him within 24 hours to inform him that Junko had died. The boys
Dahl rushed over to the house in a panic.
I rushed over of the house in a panic. In the video, I could observe many things that could be noticed as many mistakes, and when repeating the information I heard, pronunciation errors or missing information of what I said. Many times it happened to me that in my mind I translate to Spanish. Then when repeating I pronounce many words as I remember, then writing in my mind as not as they were really pronounced. Finally, I could realize that it's difficult to keep repeating for a long time and retaining information in my mind.